everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Certain Phish shows can be seen as flashpoints for the band's career. Amy's Farm in 1991, New Year's 95 at MSG, Big Cypress for sure, the Wingsuit set, and many of them have been covered on this podcast. Much more rare is a 3-night or a 4-night run that can be pointed to as a turning point. Everyone has their opinion, but I don't know if there's a better-known 4-show run that's universally praised and seen as a high watermark as 1998's Island Tour. Even at the time, we knew that we were seeing something and hearing something special, but its place in Phish history only became clearer as the years have gone by. But at the time, not everybody had the best time at the Nassau Coliseum and at the Providence Civic Center. Today's guest, artist Patrick Smith, tells of an unsettling experience during the first set of the first show of the Island Tour, April 2nd, 1998. Patrick was still new to Phish and making some rookie mistakes in 1998. Not everything went according to plan for him and his friend, but I'll let him tell the story, including why we are only covering the first set of the first night on today's episode. More exciting than the show, though, is the fact that Patrick is an artist, and the artist who created the iconic 4-portrait cover of the Farmer's Almanac Volume 6, a seminal and what I consider to be an essential guide to the band that was released in 2000. My copy has disintegrated from overuse over the past 25 years, but all of its information, including the cover that Patrick illustrated, has pretty much merged with my Phish DNA and lives forever in my memory. As a bonus, we keep things in-house today because Patrick learned about attendance bias from another special guest who had a crucial part to play in the Island Tour. But again, I'll let Patrick tell the story. For now, join Patrick and I to talk about hotel reservations, timing your boomers, and Norman Rockwell as we discuss Set 1 of April 2nd, 1998 at the Nassau Coliseum. Patrick, welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you?
I'm doing great, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing very well. So excited to talk to you today because when you first emailed me, it was like almost an old friend from my past reached out, but an old friend who I'd never met before. I say that because you are an artist, but more to the point of this conversation and our audience, you are an artist who created the artwork for the Farmer's Almanac Volume 6, for me, which is the quintessential version of the Farmer's Almanac. As far as I'm concerned, I think that's the last one that was published. So when you mentioned that to me, and I wanted to make sure I had the right image in my head, and I looked it up, and I said, I have been looking at this guy's work for 30 years or so, maybe less, but it feels that way. You know, it feels like it's been a part of my life for all of my adulthood, and to get the chance to speak to you is so exciting. And the fact that you brought up April 2nd, 1998, the first show of the Island Tour at the Nassau Coliseum, just brought it all full circle because those shows are especially meaningful to me, as well as I'm sure many of our listeners, and I'm sure you as well. So welcome. I'm doing fine, if you couldn't tell already.
No, that's great. I appreciate it. It's interesting how I'll find that I'll be probably saying similar things to what you said about, looking at the artwork and, just reading the Farmer's Almanac and first being introduced to it and really just absorbing everything from the articles and obviously the set lists, but the artwork as well. And that eventually kind of led me to become involved with the Volume 6 version. And you're correct also that it was the final version that they would be creating of that series. And it just kind of all came together, tied in a lot with, what was going on at the time for me and going to shows. I had my first, show was 12/3/97 at this in Philadelphia at the Spectrum, I guess, or whatever they called it back then. Still, I don't know if they changed.
I think it was the Spectrum in 97.
I just kind of recently got into them, and I was into the Grateful Dead. I had gone to a school where it was really almost like a Deadhead Central to some extent, almost to the point where it was like overwhelming how many people were into it. And they were also, I kept hearing about this band Phish. I knew people that went and saw them in 94 at Waterloo Village. and with all the things that went down there after the fact, and you would hear stories. Of course, there was still, no internet. So, a lot of it was just word of mouth experience and people, with what went down. And, like I said, it just kind of kept coming back and circling back. And then people would be like, oh, here. And they would try to give me a copy of a show or an album. Yeah, you should check this out. And eventually, I was in a band. We had a lot of different people and friends that were, musicians. Unfortunately, I only sang, so I couldn't play any instruments. But I remember somebody handed me Hoist. And they're like, we want to cover Down with Disease. And I was like, all right, let me hear it. I'm like, all right, this is actually pretty good. Yeah, this is, something I can get into. And that, of course, kind of snowballed into me eventually going to see them in 97. It was just the kind of one of those things where, whatever else was happening in my life at the time, being in the loop about going to a show and having friends that also wanted to go with me, it just kind of all culminated at that point, and it worked out. I saw them in 97 at the Spectrum that second night, and my friends had gone to the first night, and they were like, you're going to have an amazing time. It's amazing. It's incredible. You're totally going to love it. So I didn't want to have any expectations, but at the same time, I had just started listening to Billy Breathes, and I was blown away at that point. That's what pretty much sold me on that, because some of the earlier albums, I was kind of like, I don't know. But like, well, they're more of a live band. You should hear live shows. I was like, they're good. We'll see. And then sure enough, once Billy Breathes came out, I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. So I'm like, I gotta check these guys out. So had that opportunity, and, that was like life altering. And that's pretty much at the time when I was doing artwork, and I was at the time in art school. I just gotten into different types of, Grateful Dead art and going to festivals. I noticed there wasn't a lot of art being created. It was just one of those things that I, wanted to try out. And just, I would see some people walking around with art prints and things that they sold, on the lot and stuff like that. So that kind of gave me a little bit of an idea as far as like, okay, well, let me figure out how to go about doing this. And that's when it kind of snowballed with the artwork and how it just kind of all, fell into place for me.
For those of you listening, possibly younger listeners who may not know, the Farmer's Almanac was a fan-created book, a softcover fan-created book about Phish that had as much information available as possible, as far as I knew at the time, about the band, about their shows, their songs, set lists, in one stationary place. Basically, it was Phish.net or Reddit in a physical media form. And I think that their slogan or their trademark was like the ultimate bathroom reading for fans, with a little sketch of a dreadlocked Wook sitting on a toilet with a book, with an open book. And to me, it was essential reading. I just absorbed so much. When I can recall a set list or who wrote a song or the inspiration for a song or a certain year, it mostly comes from that. So to me, it was a Bible, for lack of a better phrase. Patrick, how did you connect with those guys and end up coming up with the job to create the artwork for that final version?
I was going to an art school in New Jersey. It was a small art school. It's called Ducray School of Art. I think it's called like Ducray School of the Arts now. But it's basically, it's the same thing. And it wasn't like an accredited school where you got an official degree. It was more of an art school where the instructors there were professionals in their field. Everybody from sculpting to, obviously ceramics and painting and illustration. I mean, it touched all areas. I was kind of searching around. Once I graduated high school, I was like, I don't know if college is for me. The one thing I always was passionate about was art and creating art. And at the time, still, once again, we make our sound like the dinosaurs we are, but there was no internet.
I get used to it on this podcast, by the way. I get used to sounding like a dinosaur.
Yeah, it's incredible. I was always wondering when time was going to come for me. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's here. But it was a word of mouth thing. It was one of my great friends. His mom was like, oh, have you ever heard of Ducray? And I'm like, Ducray? I'm like crayon? Like, what are you talking about? And she was like, no, it's an art school. It's called Ducray. It's some guy's last name. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I've never heard of it. She told me where it was, and I had to go and visit. There was no website I could look online. It was just the address, and you would come and check it out. And I thought it was great. And once I started doing that, it was like same time, it was like late 97, just like when I was really getting into Phish. And then, what had happened was, and I was of course familiar with the books. And it was about a year later, a friend of mine from one of the classes was like, "Oh, do you know the work of Chris D'Elia?" And I was like, "I don't know why that name sounds familiar." I'm like, "That name totally sounds familiar, but I'm not sure." She's like, "Well, he does the artwork for the Farmer's Almanac." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I totally know that book." And she's like, "Yeah, I figured you would." And she was like, "Yeah, I know him." And she's like, "I used to do work for him, and he happened, he lives in the area." I'm like, I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "That's amazing. I had no idea." And same thing, here I was sitting on the toilet, reading these set lists, looking at the artwork. And I'm like, "Wait a second, this guy lives he's living in, oh, it's great. He lives in New Jersey." And then sure enough, he still sometimes would come by and get art supplies because they had an art supply store at the school. And so he would still come by and visit old instructors. And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." So sure enough, he was coming by and we hit it off, of course. And I had actually lived in the school. The school was, like I said, it was an old school. It was an old Victorian building. And they changed a lot of the rooms into dorm rooms. So there was only about 15 people that lived there. And they came from all walks of life. It was amazing, experience at the time that I was going. Everything seemed to be happening like that whirlwind. What had happened was he said, it's interesting. He was, because Andy Bernstein, he was like, he actually just called me because he's not going to be doing it anymore. And him and a bunch of the other guys, Lockhart Steele, a lot of the different guys involved at the time. And he was like, they're not going to be doing it, but they're going to be, passing the torch. Our kind of idea was to kind of bring more people in rather than just keeping it us kind of thing. He was like, it'd be cool if we both worked on the painting together. And we learned from the same instructor, this amazing instructor. His name was Peter Karras. He was incredible. He was one of only 2 Norman Rockwell students, apprentices, I guess, if you will, is a better word. And that whole guy's life is a movie. They should make it. The stories he could tell, and the experiences that he had. But he was one of the 2 Norman Rockwell. Basically, once again, with the other instructors, there was a professional in his field, and he did a lot of, in the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s and 90s. He did a lot of the romance novel book covers, horror book covers, anything with a book out of New York. He was one of the people that was employed by the publishing company, and he would paint whatever cover they felt was good enough. And he taught us the same style and approach that Norman Rockwell used. And so since we both had the same kind of, instructor and the same kind of approach to painting, we kind of felt like it was a seamless transition where we could both work on it together. And we both knew the area that it was coming from, for lack of a better term. We both kind of, had that, that same idea and concept of how to apply the painting and the painting process, the illustration process. So once we got into that, and he, got me involved with that, that's when we just, started to get to work on it with communicating with, Kevin Castles and the other people involved. It just, like I said before, it took off from there. And that's when we started really diving into that universe, because we both realized that there wasn't a lot of art. I mean, there were people doing it. They just weren't doing it like us. And we were like, we have these connections, we have these abilities. Let's bring as many people as we can together, so we have like a nice team, and we could do these festivals. We Gathering of the Vibes or the Berkshire Music Festival. That was all of that was in the beginning, kind of like the beginning stages of getting those music festivals together.
Right. We're talking about the late 90s.
Yeah, pretty much. One thing led to another kind of thing. It was a lot of the dominoes started to fall into place. So we just kind of kept at it.
And that makes a lot of sense when you mentioned the Norman Rockwell influence / passing of the torch teaching, right, from one level to the next. Because I remember when I bought the book, the cover art for volume 6 features this kind of hippie girl mid-twirl, like in a mid-dance move, with a band member's face in each corner of the cover. And when I bought it, I remember looking at it and comparing it to the previous iteration, volume 5, which kind of has if I remember correctly, kind of a blue outline with almost word art text going around it. It doesn't look as organized, for lack of a better phrase. It's not as structured as Volume 6 is. So when I looked at Volume 6 and I said, wow, these portraits of each band member look really realistic. Like, Page looks like an adult on this one, like the whole band members look like adults. This is how they look when I see them at that point on the cover of Entertainment Weekly. We're talking about 99, 2000. And to your credit, the portrait of Trey is almost scarily accurate because he looked a little strung out. I mean that as a compliment because it was true to form.
I talked about the experiences that we had, and I had other instructors there at the school. And one of them was taught by Greg and Tim Hildebrandt. And they were the guys, revolutionary, artists in the 70s. They created the first Star Wars poster, as well as a lot of like the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit stuff. So, we kind of tried to like get an idea of like where we came from with our people, that taught us and how we wanted to approach the cover. And we kind of got that idea of outer space that we wanted to incorporate a lot of what was happening at the time, especially with, the music that we were being exposed to. A lot of it was just otherworldly, had that idea. And we both kind of agreed that that would be a cool background to do, as like an outer space background. And of course, with the lotus symbol, there's so many meanings behind that, and the peace, tranquility, you come, whatever you want to approach it as, that lotus pattern definitely got it. We got a vibe from that as well. And then a friend of mine, we wanted to capture some type of image where it portrayed, this woman with the ticket stub in her hand. We kind of called it like the funky bitch doing the MoMA dance with the ticket stub in her hand. And we kind of went with that as well as the central, we knew it wasn't necessarily as representational, with all the people that loved Phish, but to us, that's kind of part of what we were experiencing at the time. And then obviously with their faces, that was our original idea, is to kind of feature their faces. And the thing with them too, because that was right when Phish was really getting big, from our standpoint. Sometimes, we had not necessarily people working for Phish, but we had people working for the venue that would take our prints away if they found us selling prints of their likeness. It got like very, very sticky with a lot of, red tape as far as what we could and couldn't produce and design. And we're like, well, as long as we take a photograph and we alter it, it's completely legal. But at the same time, we couldn't just Google search it. There ain't no Google to be looking at. A lot of it was through, exchanges and emails and meetings with different people of what we could and couldn't do. And then someone we knew that worked for Relics, they had recently done a cover shoot, and there were a lot of obviously photographs that they didn't use. So they were like, well, technically this wasn't really was ever published, and you were right. As long as you alter the colors and you alter the way it's presented, you kind of make it your own, and you kind of skate around a lot of that. So we were like, okay, that's what we're going to do then. And so the Page and Fishman and Gordon were from that. And we, like I said, we just added those colors, the blues, the purples. Then with Trey, it's interesting too, because one of the bootlegs that I have of 4/3/98, we had a bootleg of that. The Trey, it was kind of like a fisheye lens photograph of him. Mm-hmm. So it was slightly distorted already, but we both loved the way he looked in that. He was always the Jedi, in a sense, with that wizard with the guitar, especially early on. That's one of the ones that, immediately attracted me to the band, and, obviously his abilities. And sure enough, when we saw that image on the bootleg CD, we were like, we should totally use this one for Trey. And, it's since it's slightly distorted, we first weren't sure if it was going to work, but, we, with our training and our expertise, if you will, we were able to make it work. And that was the same thing. A lot of people were like, look at Trey, man. They're like, what's up with Trey? I'm like, hey man, it's what it is.
It's a question a lot of people were asking in the late 90s and early 2000s. What's up with Trey?
Sure. Totally. Little did we know.
So to get a little bit, Patrick, not just as an artist, but as a fan as well, I have a few questions for you for the attendance bias lightning round.
Attendance bias lightning round.
So you mentioned that your first Phish show was December 3rd, 97 at the Spectrum. What do you remember most about that show? When you think back to that show, what are the first images or memories that come to mind?
Definitely where we were seated. We were seated behind the stage, and I'd been going to concerts for a while, since early '90s, and I was always facing the band, and I'd never sat behind a stage before, and oftentimes you couldn't sit behind the stage. So we got to our seats, I was like, oh my gosh, we are relatively. I could throw a tennis ball and hit the stage. We were pretty close. So I was like, wow, I've never been this close to the stage, let alone behind the stage. I'm like, this will be interesting. And sure enough, when they opened up with Punch You in the Eye, just being able to watch the entire crowd with the lights and just the backs of the bands rocking out with that intro, especially, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was like, oh my gosh, everybody is hooked in, pun intended. And everybody was dancing, everybody was moving, and we were kind of watching it all happen at the same time, enjoying it ourselves. It went on from there, and I was not familiar with a lot of their songs. I hadn't really given much listen to a lot of tapes and things like that. It was a lot of, like I said, just the album stuff at that time, and so I was not familiar with much of their catalog, really, to be honest. So hearing different songs, even like My Soul, I thought that at the first time hearing that, I'm like, okay, you got that standard blues, thing going. And then that when they go into the chorus, I'd never heard anything like that. And just the way the lights would flash, and I'm like, this is hysterical and brilliant. I'm like, I can't believe I'm witnessing this. And it just kind of just kept going from there. I remember just so many little snippets, but definitely for my seat location and being able to watch them interact with the crowd all night, it was just, I'd never seen anything like it.
Well, what's been your most recent Phish show, and what did you think of it?
Let's see. I think it was, I want to be incorrect. It's 12/29/24. These days with family and dealing with anything with the house that comes in, being a homeowner, I'm lucky if I can get to one Phish show a year. It was like one of those things where now I'm just happy I can go to a show. Gone are the days when I would, go on these mini tours and get all the friends together, and we would do the mail orders, find out what shows we were going to. And it was always, pretty much every show we asked for, and we would do those mail orders and decorate the envelopes and make sure all the money orders were written correctly and it had all the correct instructions, that we followed and the process, and it was like one of those things where when we got those tickets in the mail, we were just, ecstatic. And, it was just like one of those things where we had enough people to enjoy that and go with our crew. But now everybody's, growing up, everybody's living in different locations. It's harder and harder to get together. So sometimes I'll meet people in the city that I know are going to the show, but it's very rare that I travel with my ensemble. I don't get to as many shows as I used to, but I do know that when I was able to do it, it was a very short time from like late 90s into, mid 2000s, when they came back. I was still trying to get to as many, but by 2003, 2004, it kind of changed. So in that short time, I saw a lot of shows because I knew, I was like, who knows what could change and what could happen. I want to try and enjoy this when I can. I was working at a restaurant and I was able to get my shifts covered. I was able to, get whatever money together I needed in a short amount of time. Tours coming up, I got to work some doubles to save up that cash. And so it was a time when I was able to do it. And I definitely took it to the full extent that I could.
Good. And that's how I approach it now. Go when you can afford it, because who knows if there's going to be another one, because everyone from now moving forward is a bonus.
Sure. And that's what the thing, I'm not trying to find that one show, the life-changing show. I had multiple ones of those, but it's a bonus if I hear a song that I haven't heard live. Not that there's not that many of them left, but there are still some, thanks to Fishnet and being able to track all my songs and shows. I'm just going to have a good time, and I'm not going to be judging on whether or not, version was weak or what is this compared to. I'm just happy to be doing that and being at the concert, wherever it might be, and just having a great time with my friends and dancing. I love to dance. I'm one of those guys that if you gave me a choice to being, close to the stage and not being able to dance, or being out in the pit somewhere and I'd much rather, be out in the pit dancing. And, don't get me wrong, I love being up close, but I need to dance, and I need to have that space to dance, even if it's on the Sky Bridge at MSG. I'm like, I got plenty of dance too, and I get plenty of space, and that's always fun as well.
Let me ask you, if a new volume of the Farmer's Almanac were published now, let's say 2025 or 2026, do you think it would sell? Why or why not? I don't know the answer to this question. It's really just opinion based, but it's really a question about the way that media is dispersed now compared to then. But if
sure.
a group of fans got together and published something equivalent to what you and I were just talking about earlier, do you think it would sell?
I think if they did it in a way that obviously had a little bit more of a pull, I think that's something that could definitely be done. But I think it would have to be like a limited edition. It's like, we're only doing this many copies, and it'll maybe be signed by the artists and the creators, and I think, like you said, it was when the final volume was 2000. The volume 5 before that was like digitally done. It was graphic design, cover, where they just kind of threw it together last minute. And so once we did the artwork for it and made it a real thing again, I'm sure, having a limited edition of prints. If you order this book, you get also a signed copy of the print of the cover, something, the little incentive for some people to want to, invest in that or do something like that, because it's so easily accessible now. But definitely reading a book and flipping through pages and just getting, spending some time reading, it's I don't want to say a lost art, but I think something like that you could still have a market for. I just think they would have to have a more of an updated approach of how, that information, is collected, of course, because now there's countless things out there, the information that you can access. So I think they would definitely have to have some type of incentive if they were to do that.
I agree, and that's a good idea, especially what you mentioned, like the artist's signature. When it comes to the poster economy, that's like the biggest thing, is the name of the artist, and is it, perfect quality or perfect condition, stuff like that. If you make it, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? A commodity, right? More so than just a resource. That's a little bit different. I agree. That's kind of the culture that has developed around jam bands in general.
Sure. Yeah. And I met Jim Pollock not too long ago, and we were talking, like, I used to buy your artwork after the show. Like, when the show was over, I used to go to the merch stand. I'm like, oh, I really like that artwork. Oh, I'll buy it. It was like, it wasn't even rolled up. There were no tubes,
right?
Other than the set list. But there was nothing, that you have to. I'm like, well, I'm not going to carry it around during the show. I'll get it after the show. And it wasn't even a thing. I just love the art, and that's why we did it too. We were creating the art not because it was, like I mentioned before, it wasn't something that wasn't really, wasn't really being done. So, or from what we saw. So we were like, we got to do this. It was just something that we loved to do, and we wanted to spread the artwork and the joy that we found through the music. And it was our inspiration, our muse. So we felt compelled to do that as artists. So it was a perfect kind of, meeting of the minds and the years and everything that came along with it. And, nowadays, the way the artwork is viewed, I was like, where was this 30 years ago when I was doing it? But it was, before the time, and it was happening at the time. And now that time is so highly sought after, because just like anything else, we knew it as it was happening, but we didn't realize how it was going to be viewed 30 years from now. I don't think that was part of our rationale or how we were approaching it. We were just doing it because we loved it.
So today we are going to discuss the first show of the 4 Island Tour shows. We're talking about April 2nd, 1998. Just the first set of that show, even considering. When we talk about the Island Tour in this podcast, I think this is the 3rd of 4 nights that I've spoken about with guests. I think we've had the other 3 covered, or at least 2 out of 3 covered. A lot of people have this mentality that the Island Tour, even though the calendar date is 1998, they still mix it in as part of the 1997 Phish era in terms of the style that they played. What do you think about this style of playing in the Island Tour overall? related to 97 versus the type of Phish you hear in your head when you hear the year 1998.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. They still had that drive, that tenacious kind of approach to a lot of their songs. I mean, my memory gets foggy just like anybody else's at this state. There wasn't a lot of loops yet. Trey wasn't really into doing the loops for a lot of different songs. He didn't, start getting on the keyboard yet. They were still, their approach was still raw, I guess, for lack of a better term. That was definitely still part of it, right? Because it wasn't like this full-blown tour where they announced it and everybody had time to prepare or anything like that. It was, kind of thrown at us, and from what I can recall. And, we were like, okay, this is happening. All right, let's do this. This sounds interesting. So the sound wise, it definitely was still there, from what I was hearing and from what I remember. I only saw 2 shows. It was on New Year's Eve, 12/31/97, after the Philly show. We were able to get to the show on New Year's Eve, and that was, so I only had 2 shows of Phish under my belt at that point.
And finally, the question that everyone gets asked on this podcast, everyone has to answer it. I originally wrote in the notes, what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show? In our conversation, we had to kind of morph it. Similar, but not the same. So I'll ask you in this case, what is the coolest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
I mean, one of those things, it's like you could think of so many different, examples just when you ask it and phrase it that way. It's not watching them on the marquee of the David Letterman studios, blasting Wilson onto the streets of New York City or anything like that. That's close. That was up there in my highlights of just one of the coolest. Definitely when I had seen them at the Worcester Centrum in Massachusetts in 98. It's so funny. I was just looking at the stubs earlier, and somehow along the way I lost the 27th, but it was November 27th, 28th, and 29th in 1998. And we mail ordered the tickets, and my friend and I, and the first night we were situated on the floor, but all the way in the back. And I think the sections, like 1, 2, 3, and then it was 4, 5, 6, and then 7, 8, 9. So we were all on the floor in the seats, but we were in the back section. And we had gone in relatively early. We, hung out in the lot for a little while, but then we went in and we were just sitting there and enjoying the experience at this smaller venue. And, once we got inside, we were kind of just, talking to people around us, and, everybody was just, it was great just having a conversation with people. And then sure enough, the second night, we were now like moved up in the middle section. We were kind of like in the center of the floor, once again, floor seats. And we were looking around and we were like, wait, all the people that were in our section last night are in this section tonight. And everybody started realizing this almost at the same time. We were like simultaneously looking around going, like, hey, weren't we in that section over there? Yeah, yeah, okay. And then we're like, wait, where are your seats tomorrow night? They're like, section 3, front row. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we're in section 3 too. So for the longest time, I was trying to search for that feeling of community, and of course we would go with our friends and we have our own experiences, and I had experienced it at like Grateful Dead, like shows and things like that, where it felt like a community, a family, if you will. And I hadn't really experienced that yet at a Phish show. And that run of shows, that was the first time I've felt it, because by night 3, everybody in that section knew each other for 3 nights. And we, it was an amazing experience. And the fact that we were all now in the last night in the front section, on the floor, that was just, those 3 nights still stand out to me to this day. And even I remember looking at the security guard in front of the stage, and he just did not look like he was having a good time. Of course he's working, but I remember watching the guy. And then when Seth Iacovone came on that last night and they did Layla, he was singing along and like bopping his head a little bit. I was like, finally, finally you're having a good time too. I'm like, I'm not judging you, I swear. But
that's so satisfying though, right? When you see the security get into it.
Sure. And so, those 3 nights changed me as, I met a lot of great people that night, and I still see them at shows, and, we might, not be able to stop and talk, but we'll give each other a little fist bump as we walk by. A lot of relationships were kind of, formed that night. Little did we know, but I mean, and I like, what's amazing about it is that just wasn't, I don't think that was like coincidental. Like somebody at Phish ticketing, we're like, okay, we're going to take this entire section and each night we're going to move them. I'm like, I don't think like a machine did that. I think that was some type of human input that allowed that to happen. I'm like, how can this how are we all like, they literally grouped us together and they're like, well, what if we just move them up, and like, that's what happened, because everybody was in that back section the first night. We were all, just slow each night, just migrating. It was hysterical.
To me, it's only at Phish shows could something like that happen. It's like too much of a coincidence.
Right.
Like almost like it was meant to be. But Patrick, before we move on to the island tour and the context of this show, April 2nd, let me ask you, as an artist, where can the listeners who are listening to this episode now, where can they view your art or follow you as an artist? Do you have a website, social media? Anyone could grab on to watch Patrick Smith at work?
Sure. I'm on Instagram. It's by Limb Art, BY, like limb by limb, BYLIMB Art. And it's slowly being revamped because I'm doing some new work and I'm kind of entering a new business of just different adventure, but I'm slowly revamping it. But you could find me on Instagram, by Limb Art. It's like I said, one of those things where, it's always in flux. I'm an art teacher at my full-time, job. And of course, being, a father of two, preteen boys, teenage boys. So my life is full of constant adventures and things that come up spur of the moment. But this is something I'm starting a new adventure in the business world of art. So I'm kind of revamping. But yeah, I still, it's funny. I still have prints, of when I used to sell them on the lot, Farmer's Almanac prints. And I also have some other Grateful Dead and Trey stuff. Just artwork that like I said, at the time, I didn't think, people were going to be reselling these on eBay 30 years later. I just thought, yeah, this is something they remember from getting in the show in the lot, so we would go from show to show and not really caring that we had to keep these prints in pristine condition, so they've, traveled, throughout my life and moving it from one car to the next or one house to the next. So I'm like, not all of them are in the tip-top condition. I'm like, I got to go through everything, but a lot of it's more commission work now and doing things like that where people are, commissioning me to do a painting, some type of art that fits their need. So that's where I'm at now.
Hi, everybody. Brian here to welcome you to the set break of today's episode of Attendance Bias. First, thank you for listening. And second, just a quick reminder to tell you that even though Attendance Bias comes to you for free, it does take a lot of work and it does take quite a bit of money to keep the lights on here at production. So I just wanted to ask a small favor if you could support the podcast in any number of the following ways. If you could leave a review or a rating of it on whichever podcast app you use. If you could spread the word, telling a friend or someone you think may be interested in it about it. Or probably the most concrete way is to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donate however much you can financially to help with the continuing costs of Attendance Bias. So thank you again so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the second half of today's episode.
When was this show played?
So let's take a look back at the island tour, which was 4 spontaneous shows. I use spontaneous in quotes kind of because, as you suggested earlier, they were just kind of announced. They're not really a full tour traditionally as we think of it now. So the show that we're discussing today, set 1 of April 2nd, it was the first of those 4 spontaneous in quotes shows. And it was the first of the first 2 at Nassau before this like micro tour moved to Providence for the 2 final shows. After NICU, in the middle of the first set of this show, Trey explained to the audience that they were recording a new album that we all know now would become The Story of the Ghost, and the band, quote, got bored while recording, and they wanted to just play some live shows. And so much has been said, discussed, argued about the island tour, both on Fantasy Tour, on Phish.net, on Twitter, here on the podcast, so on and so forth, that I think we could just get right to the heart of it. I couldn't attend any of these shows. I remember with very sharp clarity the reason why. I was in my high school drama club. So this was 1998. I was a junior in high school, and we were putting on as a drama club Tommy for the spring musical. And it's my favorite music ever. Not just my favorite musical, but my favorite music ever recorded, my favorite album. And the performance dates were the same dates as the island tour. I can't sing. I didn't have a lead part. So I even went to the drama director, Mr. Llewellyn, and I told him, I think I want to drop out of the show. And I remember his response. He said, I don't want you thinking that you're disposable just because you don't have a solo. And to me, that like really struck me. That's like a lifelong lesson that I remember, even without being taught, if that makes sense. Like, even for a hometown Phish show, it was hard for me to drop out after hearing that. Because I live at the time, even closer, like right by the Nassau Coliseum, like a 10-minute drive,
Oh,
but I could
wow.
be right there. So I was already dedicated to those shows, the drama shows, not the Phish shows. But my friend Craig at the time went with his sister to both of the Nassau shows on April 2nd and 3rd. And I think on the 4th, the Islanders had a home game. And I don't remember against who, but Craig and I went to the game together. So he was at the Nassau Coliseum the night before and then the next day. And I remember him just going on and on about the show on the 3rd, especially, and how it just melted his mind. Like, as many times as I said, oh, wow, that sounds great or cool, he just kept repeating, no, 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 you don't get it. It was amazing. He went so far to think that there was a special light display during the national anthem at the Islanders game. He said to me, I remember this, that maybe it was leftover lighting effects from the Phish show last night. Like, it really blew his mind. And I know he's not the guest on the show today, but when I think of the Island tour, I remember I couldn't go. He got me the turquoise and orange and white t-shirt that was part of the Island tour. And I remember hearing all about it from him the next day. I've always liked the 3rd as the best of the 4 nights, but over the years, I think I've been convinced that the shows just get progressively better as they went on, which means that this show we're talking about today, the 2nd, would be the least of the 4, but it's still an exceptionally great show. I also remember getting these tapes very quickly. So what were your memories? Who were you as a person? What was your life like in the spring of 98 that led you to the Island tour?
Well, we kind of touched on it a little with the artwork. I was going to art school, and when we found that they were going to be doing these shows, where I'm like, all right, well, I can't go to all 4. I'm like, we could do Nassau for sure. Let's get both Nassau. And it's still, getting tickets. There were multiple ways of doing it, and online, with the internet, wasn't always, in our view, like the easiest and quickest way. We're like, we're better off calling Ticketmaster or waiting, and then when we, they go on sale, they'll pick up and, or we could go to a record store in Summit somewhere, or there was a couple record stores, Scotty's Records, and one of them was in Summit. So a lot of times we would get the tickets there because they had a little Ticketmaster,
Sure, we used to go to Pathmark, a little drugstore. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't even remember how we ended up getting the tickets, but we did. And what was crazy about it, just how the art and everything else was tying in to what we were doing at the time. I was like, this will be good, and it was still, like I said, early in my Phish experience. And I'm like, right now I'm soaking it in. And I'm like, these will be, a nice little run of shows, and I'm excited for it, and, hopefully this would, add to my visions of different, art projects and things to come. And of course, at that point, the almanac still wasn't even a thing yet. But we, still just doing different paintings and submerging myself in that world. The same thing. I had graduated high school in 1995. So we, were fully invested in what was happening with those shows coming up. I don't think, back in the day when you used to have to make a reservation at a hotel, I can't remember what hotel was right there.
At Nassau?
Yeah, Nassau.
It's the Marriott.
The Marriott. So we had made reservations for 2 nights there. And when, same thing, there was no internet. I don't think you could make online reservations at the time. You called up, and back then, I knew they would hold the reservation, but if you were like late after a certain point, they would actually release it.
Sure.
Like that's uncommon and uncalled for nowadays. And that maybe I think with a credit card on, on the reservation, maybe they would hold it for you for, a little while longer. I can't remember if we had, like,
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole nother podcast to be had about the role of e-commerce and how it
Sure.
has changed from, even in this case, in the late 90s to today. It was a completely different paradigm of, quote, going on tour or just going out of town to see a show.
Sure. I mean, we would look on AAA. They had a thing of AAA rates at these hotels. So we made it there, and we got there late because you're going out to, Long Island, that traffic. We had no idea.
Right, from New Jersey, especially.
Yeah, we had no idea of it was just incredible. And finally we get there, and they're like, sorry, your reservation is gone. We gave it to somebody else. And we're like, I couldn't believe it. I was just like, I did that old joke, if the president was coming, would you have a room for him? Like, yes, of course. Well, he's not coming, so I'll take his. I don't know if it was Don Rickles or whatever. But that was my approach. I'm like, you got to have something, man. They're like, no, it's booked. So, of course, I was very upset. I even shouted out at one point, just my aggravation waiting by the elevator. Hotel security came out. They're like, everything okay out here? I'm like, oh, geez. Now my friend was like, do not cause a scene, and I'm seeing all these heads walking in the hotels. They're like, oh, sweet hotel, bro. And I'm like, fuck you. So needless to say, I was not a happy person, but I was like, all right, let's just, we'll figure out a place to stay. They gave us a list of places to call. It wasn't even, once again, we couldn't look on our phones, no smartphones. So we had to call these places to see if they had availability. And of course, everything was booked. And finally, we got through to this one place. We're like, awesome. And we go. And sure enough, I mean, it was like West LA fadeaway, looking for a chateau. Only one room will do. That's all I need. And it was a daily rate motel. I wouldn't even think it was a hotel. It was a motel. And it was a daily rate place or hourly, not even daily, hourly rate place. And as soon as we realized that, we're like, oh my gosh. Like, they're like, how long you want it for? I'm like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? We're doing it. I'm like, oh, you're staying all night? Okay. I'm like, wait, what? We get in there, like mirrors on the ceiling, no joke. And I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, how are we going to come here after the show? Like during the day, the place already looked kind of sketchy. I'm like, what are we going to do? So we're like, oh, I'll figure it out. Let's just get to the show. Sure enough, we get to the show, and we had general admission. And, Nassau Coliseum, we got in there, and maybe we were about 5 or 6 rows back, and we're sitting there on these. I remember being able to see the ice underneath the floor. It was like this kind of like this floor paneling stuff made of, a combination of things, I'm sure. And I'm like, wait, is that the ice right there? Like 6 inches, like I could see it through the cracks. And I'm like, that's crazy that the ice is right there. So we're just sitting there. And sure enough, my friend, we had a bag of mushrooms, and an eighth of mushrooms. And we're like, all right, let's just split it. And, once again, looking back on it, now it's like, oh, we take them in the lot hours before, that way, once we're inside, we're good. But we were young, and we were still experiencing that part of, going to shows, and, any type of altering, states and substances, were part of it. And I don't want to say we didn't know any better, but we were just kind of, let's see what happens,
Yeah, well, it's rookie mistakes. Everyone makes them.
Yeah. So sure enough, we split an eighth, and everything, it was fine. I mean, there was no capsules. There was no mushroom chocolates that we knew of. Putting it on whatever I could eat, and just rinsing and doing all that, and drinking Dr. Pepper, anything to cover up the flavor. I can't imagine what we must have looked like to anybody else as we're, taking the last bits from the plastic baggie, really ready to go. And once again, never been out to Long Island or Nassau Coliseum, never saw a show there, let alone a hockey game or anything like that. So I didn't really know what to expect. I just that wasn't even a thought at the time. And we're, everybody's just hanging out, sitting on the floor waiting for those lights to go down. But then once those lights went down, everybody stood up, and all of a sudden everybody shifted forward a little bit. And then I was like, holy cow, this place just got much tighter and much closer together than we were just a few moments ago. And my one friend, now I'm 6'2", at the time, 200 pounds. But so I was okay with that space, but my friend is like 5 feet tall, and she was like, yo. And she's like, if it stays like this, we can't be here all night. And I'm like, all right. And then the guy next to us was like, yeah, once they come on and play, it'll kind of spread out a little bit. So I was like, all right, cool. Let's see how it goes.
Was he right?
Yeah. And sure enough, they came on, and the energy that I felt once that they came on. And of course, part of it was the psilocybin kicking in. But at the same time, it was also just the fact that we were in Long Island and it was the Nassau crowd. And I was like, whoa, that I felt that when they took the stage and Trey's doing his little bow, and they're just going to their instruments. And, sure enough, once they kicked in, now I wasn't familiar with Tube. I had no recollection of ever hearing it really, or paying at least that much attention to it. As soon as they kicked in, the crowd erupts, and it's a very, you gotta, for the fans, and I do this more often now, but especially, take yourself out of it for a minute and imagine like just hearing, Tube for the first time. It's very disjointed. They're going from one, kind of approach to a completely different approach. The speed, the tempo is changing, just the way, they organize the lyrics on top of the music. It's at the time, for somebody who's never heard it, it was a very disjointed kind of feel, just changing those different tempos going. So, but the whole place is rocking, and you end up, surrendering to the flow and rocking with it. And at that point, it kind of spaced out a little bit on the floor, but I remember everybody kind of in unison was just, once they hit that jam, the floor was just bouncing back and forth. It seemed like it was all like in sync, we were just back and forth and rocking out. And I was like, this is insane right now. I'm like, this is pretty intense. I'm like, I wasn't expecting it at all. And the jam that they were doing, it was all new, still I was not familiar with this song. So I was just taking it as they were giving it. They changed and going from one thing to the different measure to the next. And, I was just trying to keep up with what was happening.
to go on. It's a lot of sensory overload. I remember in 1999 when Phish came back to the Nassau Coliseum, I was on the floor both nights and got front row because at the time my friends and I had the stamina and the will to just wait in line for 4 hours, like to get to the lot right when it opens and then wait for the GA line, and then we just went straight up page side. And I know what you're talking about when the lights go down and the band starts playing. You kind of get pushed a little bit forward. But also, once they start playing something like you said, you mentioned Tube that opens the show with a really good groove, everyone kind of settles into a space. It's like a moving organism, no matter where you are. So you kind
Yeah,
of understand your place within it. It
sure.
makes sense. And I remember going over the set list after this show because my friends were freaking out when they opened with Tube because our previous show, which was our only show, we were new to the live Phish experience at this point, was December 29th, 97, just a few months prior when they blew this song wide open. To me, I
Yeah.
still think that's the best Tube they've ever played. And so we thought amongst our little friend group, oh, it must be special. Every time that Phish plays Tube, it means it's a special show. But even on this audience recording, you can hear how locked in Fishman and Gordon are. Like the bass drum, especially, is so prominent in this mix before Page gets really dirty on the clavinet. And then he switches over to the organ. Like you were just saying, it's not just one quick, easy 4-minute song. They've really changed things up dynamically throughout the whole performance. It's a really well played Tube.
Yeah, and the people are reacting to it, and that was something that I wasn't also experienced, well versed with in the, like that reaction, and what anytime they either took a solo or finished a solo, the crowd would erupt, and then I'm like, wow, I'm like, this is actually happening, and then they break back into it with that nice little, blues riff. And then I was like, okay, here we're back. Okay, now we're back. It's taken off and it's gone through all these different measures and arrangements, and I don't even know if I'm using the proper terminology, but it's all over the place. Like I said, completely new to me. But like even lyrically, just trying to make out what he's saying, I'm like, he's talking so fast right now. I'm like, what are they saying? What is happening? But at the same time, enjoying it, so it was a lot going on just with one song.
Yeah,
And,
you can hear it. The crowd is going nuts right when the song ends because they pick up right where they left off for the 97 jamming style because they're still wah-wah jamming, stop, start jamming right before they go into the blues coda that you mentioned.
sure,
And the crowd goes nuts. On this recording, you could hear it as if they just finished like a mid-second set monster jam. Like
sure.
this might be the peak of Phish, period.
Yeah.
Depending on your point of view, there's an argument to be made here.
Sure, definitely. And I remember even getting the tape of that show, a few weeks later. And I remember when I would listen to the first set, I would still have like this slight feeling of like unease because even though it was an audience recording, and I was like, oh my gosh, it wasn't just my imagination. I do remember this, and I remember being like, this is intense. I was like, I was not expecting this whatsoever. And, and then the fact that they go from that into My Mind's Got a Mind of Its Own. Once again, did not know the song, was not familiar with it whatsoever, obviously. So I was like, is this a country? Oh, it's one of their little country ditties. All right, little country western thing going on here. Complete, juxtaposition of what I just heard, to then go into that, and I get it, allows everybody to catch their breath, which is essentially what we did, where we were just like, okay. And then it kind of, opened up a little bit more on the floor. I was like, all right, this is good. Okay, now we're good, a pretty, solid rendition. And obviously now with all my, the experience of all these songs and shows, I would have been loving every second of it, but looking back then, since I wasn't familiar with the song, I was just kind of like, all right, cool. I wonder what they're going to play next. It's pretty straightforward, kind of version.
Yeah, but what they played next is not straightforward. After Tube, My Mind's Got a Mind of Its Own, then they play The Sloth, which is a banger. And it might be hindsight that I'm looking at it, but it already sounds like you're in for a special show.
Sure.
Because my first show, I know this wasn't your first, but the way you're describing the uncertainty and just the sensory overload of whether it's emotional or spatial or just different things that you're hearing with different measures or styles of music, that's kind of how I felt at my first show, also being unaware of a lot of the songs and not knowing exactly what's being played. the Sloth is like a huge banger, and they don't always play the Sloth. It's still kind of a rarity. So the crowd loves it, but you also might have been being tossed like in a washing machine, like you don't really know what you're in the middle of while it's happening.
Sure. And that's exactly what was happening to me, because, they kick in with it, very quietly. And I mean, it sounded like it did where they turn that volume up ever so slightly and they kick in. And I was like, and then of course the place erupts. And I was like, oh my gosh, oh no, it's another song that A, I don't know. And B, this sounds like a heavy metal kind of song, which I mean, I grew up on, Metallica, I was, all about the 80s hair bands and stuff like that. But once again, I'm like, I don't know. And then he starts shouting, and then there's this call response thing happening and they're laying into it. And I was like, this is another crazy song. I'm like, you get two, I don't know which direction. I can't relate to any of it or put a finger on what's happening and musically. I'm like, and this is another one. They're just shifting all over, and what is he talking about? Why is he yelling? And I was like, this is incredible. But at the same time, I was a little apprehensive of what was to come. And sure enough, once they lay into that jam where it becomes that creepy blues riff again, you think you're safe with the blues, but the tenacity and the thoroughness of how well they're playing and locked into each other, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, this is pretty heavy. And like the place is rocking. And once again, they're kind of moving in unison. And it's like this place is shaking right now. And I was like, I can't do anything about any of this. I'm just here for the ride and let's see what happens.
And what happened next was NICU, which to me is a sentimental favorite. I've mentioned this 1,000 times on this podcast, but this is what opened my first show. So whenever they play NICU, to me, it's like, oh, this must be great. This is something special now. And they were playing it a lot in these years, in 97 and 98. Sure. So I thought it was, a huge crowd favorite. They're going to play it every time they play New York. And that's not the case. And it wasn't then. But there were huge cheers after almost every line in the chorus. Like if you listen and there's the part where they say, though you rehearse tomorrow's verse, huge cheer. Like this crowd has ceaseless energy. Throughout this set. And then at 5 minutes and 20 seconds, there's a huge ovation. Like the song's almost over. And Trey says, thanks for coming out. This is quote, thanks for coming out. We got bored at home and wanted to do some shows. As if it's that easy. People spend their whole careers, musicians do, trying to play coliseums and arenas. These guys just snap their fingers because they were bored. And now they can sell out 4 nights across the Eastern Seaboard.
Yep, and tear your face off. Yeah, we once again another song that I don't probably only heard, a few times from a tape. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I recognize this one, and I'm like, all right, it's got a better, it's good feel. I'm not, nobody's headbanging to this one. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm like, all right. And then sure enough, couple people down from me, they sparked this joint, and it slowly started coming my way. So I'm like, all right, if it makes it to me, I don't know if this is a group that knows each other and it's just going to stay in their circle or what. But if it comes to me, I'm like, that smells delicious. I need some of that. And sure enough, I took one hit, and not long after, they broke into Stash. And I was familiar with Stash from a live one, of course. And but I don't think I ever really, experienced one on that level. For sure, because it was my first Stash anyways, but like as far as really feeling it, I think it might have been my first one, but nonetheless, just being that close on the floor and then breaking into it. At first, I was like, since I was familiar with it, I'm like, all right, cool, this is good. I'll be able to settle into it. But then, sure enough, the jam just changes into a different direction. And once again, I was not prepared for that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, this is intense. I'm like, this is not, once again, I just did not expect how intense and locked in they would be. I'm like, the wizardry that was happening. I remember at this point, since now the visuals are happening, and I remember looking at Trey, and Trey just had that look on his face, like he was just staring into oblivion, like he was being almost controlled by some otherworldly, energy. And I was trying to connect, I guess, and then watching him. But I was like, dude, this guy, that's where I started being like, he's a Jedi warrior. He's a wizard. He is something I've never seen anything like it. Then I remember looking over at Phish, and he just has his eyes closed and just playing this beat. And I'm like, I can't connect. And of course, Mike's just standing there bobbing his head. And the only person I could really like look at and feel some type of comfort was Paige, because at least he was just kind of, he still doing his thing. But he, you could see his process as it was happening, and he's like leaning into the keys and doing his thing. I felt like at least, because he was looking around at the band and watching them and looking for the cues, and then he'd look over at the audience and then watch. So I'm like, okay, so he's somewhat grounded here, with the rest of the band. I don't know what planet they're on right now. But I was like, all right, at least with Paige, I'm like, I feel some type of comfort with him. So I'm like, okay, this is, everything's cool, but the more they were getting into the jam, the more almost relentless it was starting to feel. And maybe it was also the psilocybin boomers kicking in.
But that makes sense though, because the Stash, to begin with, the song, right? Even the key in which the jam starts is a little unnerving or a little unsettling, but the guitar line that starts right when this jam starts, right before 6 minutes, it's very tense right away. And then to your point of Trey just kind of like being a Jedi and channeling this music through him, if not coming from him, keeps throwing out these musical hints at, I think, around 7 minutes and 15 seconds, where they keep modulating the key or they keep moving it up one for 30 seconds. And then again, 30 seconds later. And like, it's almost like they're playing jamming games with each other. And Fishman, for me, through my ears, he's the one keeping it all together. right, you're talking about Page visually. In my
Right.
ears, it's the bass drum and the cymbals that I can latch onto.
Yeah. Yeah. It got to the point where, everyone's rocking out on the floor. And the fact that then I took that hit just kind of sent me into the stratosphere. At some point when they were in the middle of that jamming, I think, I think it was like at the end when they're, coming back to it at the crescendo and everybody's cheering and losing their minds. I ended up falling. Basically because, whether it was I don't think I passed out, but I couldn't feel my legs. My legs were just caught up in everything that was happening. And I essentially just lost my balance and I fell.
Oh, man.
And and mind you, it's so tight and so crowded on the floor. I'm like, how did I fall? I'm like, if anything, I would just probably lean on somebody. But maybe I did. Maybe I did pass out, and like just boom, lack of oxygen to the brain, boom. But immediately I opened up my eyes and my friend was standing over me and she's like looking at me horrified. And so, she stands me up and they all of a sudden they go into, the climax, and then the song ends and the crowd erupts and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, I think so. And I'm like, what the hell just happened? I'd never experienced that. Sure enough, then they break into horn and I was like, okay, this is cool. This is nice and calm now. I'm like, oh, I know this song, I'm like, all right, cool. This is good. And she's like, I don't know what the hell just happened. She's trying to talk to me. She's like, we need to get out of here. She's like, this is too much. She's like, we need to leave. And I'm like, are you talking about leaving the show? She's like, we just need to get out of this space right here. She's like, this is too much for me.
I think we've all been there. Just to advocate for her, for anyone listening, I think we've all been there. We're like, we can't just stay here anymore. We can go anywhere else.
Yeah. So sure enough, it was during, nice and calm horn. I was able to navigate through. And same thing, I was having trouble walking. And I'm like trying to do the whole, go through the motions of what I normally do. And just walking was challenging. And it's dark, and there's people's stuff, there was no there weren't tarp people on the floor yet. So it wasn't like it was, too crazy stepping on everything. But, you still had to walk through this crowd and we were right in the center of it all. And so it was, a little bit of a maze to get out. But, eventually once we got to the steps, once again, I couldn't, because of the effects of everything, I couldn't see the differentiate between each step to the next. There wasn't like a glowing tape on each step where you could see where it was just, and then next thing you know, I'm falling because I can't see the step, and I was like, oh my gosh, now everybody, my friend's like, oh my God,
motor functions are just failing all over the place.
Yeah. And I'm like, I can't even see the steps. I'm like, I'm tripping over these steps. I'm like, I can't even walk right now. And all of a sudden, as I stand up there, I saw this guy and he had on the skull and crossbones, like a pirate shirt or something. And I remember seeing that. And then all of a sudden I looked away and all I saw, because it was a black shirt and it was like a white skull. And so the only thing I saw was the skull and crossbones. And then when I looked away, it was just a repeating image of skull and crossbones.
You just saw the negative.
Yeah. And it was going to the beat and everything. And I was like, oh my. God. I'm like, this is not what I wanted at all. So finally, I was able to make it up the stairs. And then we're just sitting in the hallway of there, the Nassau Coliseum. And then they start playing Waste. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, we love this is a great song. We love this nice melodic song. And I'm like, so we're just
That's what you
sitting there.
needed. That's what
Yeah.
you needed. If I were a doctor, I would prescribe Waste to you right now with some orange juice.
Yep, totally. And we were just, totally relaxed and trying to get a hold of what just happened. And to me, I was like, I experienced it, so I wasn't, I was like, I felt fine, at that point. But now my friend who was with me, now she was like kind of freaked out,
Sure.
and she's like, I had to pick you up off the floor, and now I'm freaked out because I'm starting to bug out a little bit. And I'm like, no, I completely understand. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm like, I have no idea what happened, but she's like, but you're okay now? And I'm like, I'm totally fine. I'm like, and she's just, I kind of want to leave. And I'm like, well, I mean, I don't care, actually. I'm like, I'm so banged up right now, I don't even care. She's like, wait, you're still banged up? I thought you were okay. I'm like, no, it's not what I meant. I just meant that I'm so spun out that I don't even care if we stay or go right now. And she's like, I don't know what to do. And then sure enough, Waste ends. And then they kick right into Chalk Dust.
Which
And
I wrote, I'm sorry to cut you off, but just what I wrote
yeah.
when they started Chalk Dust, my first note is just ramp up the energy in the place to 11, all in capital letters with like 5 exclamation points. Because, man, you could feel it even decades later on an audience recording that everyone was so placid and nice, like you were just describing during Waste. And then Chalk Dust is so friggin' fast, exceptionally fast, that you could hear everyone in the whole Nassau Coliseum just going bananas.
Yep. And we were right on the steps there on the side stage watching it. And it was just, like I said, it was so intense. When they ended, I was like, if you want to go, we can go. And she's like, I want to go. And I was like, all right, And so in my head, I was like, they should have a place outside, where if you need to like get your senses together and, gather your thoughts and get your bearings, and like, if they had something like that, I'm like, that would have been perfect, but at the time I'm like, we just need to go outside. And I don't think even then, I don't think I realized that we were actually leaving. But I remember the security guard was like, "You guys leaving?" And we're like, "Yeah." He opened up the door for us, and we left. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's it. We just left." But like, it was only my third show, and I still wasn't sure 100%, how I felt about everything, the scene, the music, the band members, just everything. I still wasn't 100% sold, as they say these days. But that chalked us. Same thing when I go back and when I would listen to that tape. I remember leaving during Chalk Dust because it was so boom, cutthroat right to it. And I'm relentless, now, of course I would love a Chalk Dust like that, always have. But at the time, even though I was familiar with Chalk Dust, it was just something that just kind of sealed the deal for us at the time for the night. And we made our executive decision because that place, it just sounded like the roof blew off the place at that point. And I was like, I don't know how much I can take of this.
Yeah, I even thought that they go completely off the rails around 7 minutes toward the second half of the track, but they do pull it together just in time for the coda. And then Trey says, before they walk off stage, he says, "We left you on a low note for the sake of contrast and composition. We will now leave you on a high note to end the set." And they do a big power chord. Even the band was aware of how insane and intense this version of Chalk Dust Torture was. And you could hear it in the feedback from the crowd, how it's turning the whole Coliseum into a roller coaster. People losing their shit everywhere.
Yeah, and that's what we felt. And then we had to go back to that hotel. No, she was, "Are you okay to drive yet?" I'm like, "All right." We actually waited in the car and just listened to some Dead show until I felt that I was capable of driving. And then sure enough, we saw people coming out of the show. So I'm like, "Oh, I guess the show must be over." And I'm like, "Okay, I think I can drive right now." And so sure enough, we were able to navigate back to our seedy hotel.
That shitty hourly rate hotel, motel.
Yep. And I was just like, and we're laying on the bed. I'm like, I don't know if I'm like, we ripped the comforter off and we're just laying there. I'm like, I can't even get under these sheets or anything. I'm like, we're just going to stay here for the night. And I'm like, we didn't even know at the time if we even wanted to go see the next show, 4/3/98. I'm like, we already had tickets for it, but we're like, I don't know. It kind of just left a bad taste in our mouth. But I was like, from what we listened to, how we experienced them on New Year's Eve and then at the Spectrum, I'm like, we got to still give it one more chance. I mean, we have the tickets. We're here. Let's just go, see and really try to take in everything. And then, and sure enough, that show being with that, we, eventually we did decide to go to, that show ended up being what sold me for life. I tried to not do as much substances. We tailgated for a little while in the parking lot. And then when we went inside, we had different seats. We were kind of behind the soundboard, slightly up. So we still had a nice view panoramic of the stage. And that show was obviously, that changed my world. And even it kind of brought us back to how I found out about your podcast with the attendance bias, with meeting Tigger, at the MSG show last year, the 12/29, that, kind of comes full circle, with finding out, about what you're doing. And then here we are.
Well, Patrick, thank you a billion times over for not only telling us the story behind the cover of the Farmer's Almanac and your work as an artist and the background that went into that, but also sharing your experience, both the highs and the lows of the Island Tour, the first night, first set of the Island Tour. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and enlighten us, to teach us, and also really making me feel, after all these years, like I was actually there at that first night at the Coliseum. Much appreciated.
Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Patrick and I did pretty well today, but just the same, there were a few parts that we messed up, so we gotta make sure we double check ourselves and get everything right.
Attendance bias fact check.
Volume 6 of the Farmer's Almanac was published in 2000, so while I haven't been looking at Patrick's artwork for 30 years, we can say it's been at least 25 years at the time of this recording. The Spectrum was called the Spectrum back in December 1997 when Patrick saw his first Phish show, although it was sponsored by Core States Bank, so officially it was the Core States Spectrum. Patrick says that when he was getting into Phish, he had heard about their show at the Waterloo Village in 1994 and all the things that happened there. Phish played Waterloo Village in Stanhope, New Jersey in 1993 and 1995, but not 1994. I'm guessing that Patrick is referring to the June 23rd, 1995 show that contains a great version of Reba, Harpua with a verse of ABBA's song Waterloo, and a guest spot from John Popper on Llama, among other shenanigans. When thinking of the coolest thing Patrick has seen at a Phish show, he mentions the band playing on top of the David Letterman marquee. That was on June 21st, 2004, when the band played a mini set from the David Letterman marquee in New York City to promote the Undermine album to the crowd of New Yorkers below on the sidewalk. The Islanders did have a home game after the Island tour. They played the Rangers and beat them 3-0. At the end of the conversation, Ryan brings up that he met Tigger, who told him about attendance bias. He is speaking about attendance bias guest and Phish legend JoJo Cassone, who outran Carini at the Nassau Coliseum, aka Don't Let Carini Get You, and told his story on this podcast, plus much more, on an episode that aired on May 22nd, 2021. That's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Patrick Smith for joining me today, Phish.net for their help with the fact check, the Mockingbird Foundation for everything they do to support children's music education, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show. You can do that by following Attendance Bias on social media, leaving a rating and a review of it on any podcast app, and especially by visiting www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias and donating anything you can afford. Every penny helps. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Attendance Bias.